Wheel of Genre, the show for readers who saw the title like Forbidden Planet and said, how can we make that even more weird? Right now, we are reading every story in Harlan Ellison's anthology, Dangerous Visions. And my God, some seem a little more dangerous than others. Too dangerous, I might even say. This week is Theodore Sturgeon's If All Men Were Brothers, Would You Let One Marry Your Sister? I'm Zach. I am interested this week in, I'm interested in his style, his what he describes as going one step further. And how successful is it? What works with this, and why doesn't it work?
Bob, I'm interested in very similar style. This is very different from Damon Knight's story, which is very short, very quick to the point. This is long, drawn out, and interesting. It's the pulpiest pulp I could ever imagine, is what it feels like. And I'm interested in Ted Sturgeon, and what he thinks about science fiction and what he wants to contribute to science fiction. But this is such a hard story to describe. I feel like so many things happen and they aren't really connected, and it's just a flood of information. If you didn't like Philip Jose Farmer's The Riders of the Purple Age, you're definitely not gonna like this, which this story might be maybe even more out there in some ways. It is really hard to piece together. There are so many strange fever dream-like scenes where Charlie Bucks he barges into a man's office who is the archive master. He says, "Look, I've got a crazy story for you." And he doesn't really get to the point for almost 60 pages. He rambles on. He changes subject. He keeps saying, "I'm going to get to the point." The sergeant master, the archive master says, "Can you please get to the point? Me and the reader are very tired." And he just keeps going. And it feels like similar to Damon Knight's, where it's a quick joke. This feels kind of like a very dangerous joke that is hinted at, sidestepped, hinted at again, and then finally revealed to you. And I don't know if it really pays off, but it's a very kind of clumsy cloak and dagger experience.
Yeah, I like the comparison to a joke in the sense that, it's a concept. It takes a long while to get there. And just to flesh out that, what the concept is basically he has gone to a planet where sexual relations between family members is normalized, and it turns out to be a utopia. So he's leaving behind, I guess you could say, normal post-future Earth to go live amongst them. One of the things that really strikes me about the reception of this, and this plays off of what you're saying, Bob, about it being kind of difficult to track, is some of the reception I see is people saying, "Oh, we hate the concept. The concept is disgusting. It's absolutely vile." But the story itself is so beautiful. It's so beautifully told, which really struck me because, like, as we discussed in the previous episode and in our Roger Zelazny Lord of Light episode, I love science fiction with just a simple one-sentence concept that can then be fleshed out. And this has a really strong concept, weird concept for sure, but I respect it for having a very strong concept. But I do think that what everyone else is saying about the story itself being quite beautifully written is 100% not the case. It's totally out of control. And it's out of control in the sense of just like how it's structured, right? So like, we have this entire bit for the first part of it where it's the guy and the archive master, and the archive master knows about the planet, but he has to pretend that he doesn't. The guy is detailing of how he's trying to get to the planet, and he wants the archive master to tell him about the planet. But then he suddenly reveals that he knows all about the planet because he's been there. And this is all happening in like first person. It's being told from his perspective and his reminiscences, so it's a really, straightforward structure. But then at a certain point, the story turns into a third person story as he talks about learning the revelation of this. And Then it turns into a first person rant, like an Ayn Rand style, Fountainhead style rant about the benefits of incest. And it is like I found just keeping track of how this story was structured to be like it's like an art novel, not in a good way.
Not in a good way. It is. It has many different genres inside of it too. I know when Vonnegut talked about Ted Sturgeon because he used his name to make Kilgore Trout. He says that he was a writer of hack work, hack science fiction, and pornography. And there is like semi-pornographic, or at least erotic. There is like the erotica genre in this, and it's interesting because those are those, like you said, Zach, the third person kind of almost interject. They're just kind of in the story all of a sudden. He's talking to the archive master, and then suddenly we get these italicized, long, erotic passages of how he's just, experiencing this utopia. I'll say that. But yeah, very hard to keep track of. At one point, he narrates going into the town, being mugged. Everyone tries to beat him up. Someone says, here's a bunch of dog turds. They throw it at them, and then someone else nearby complains that the dog turds are too dry. So a third person says, "Oh, I'll make them wet for you." And then and then it just moves on to the next scene.
Yeah.
Why is that there? Why is that there?
Well, and why is there the bit with the secretary there, where like we open up with this kind of like verbal power battle between clash between the secretary of the archive master and him, ultimately leading nowhere. We never see the secretary again. Why was it there? There's just, look, it feels out of control in the way that any first draft feels out of control, like exploring every angle, the author's trying out different things, seeing where the story will take them. But it's almost as if like he had the concept, he knew the concept, which is good. Start with the concept, but then everything else was just kind of like fit in, and it's a baffler. It's a baffler.
In the afterword, he says, I've read the story twice, and once thought it was dreadful and once thought it was wonderful. So I think you're right. This might just be a first draft. And I feel maybe that Ted Sturgeon only writes first drafts and sends them. He wrote it once and then he just read it and said, "Oh yeah, well, I'll send it to Harlan Ellison. I don't care." I wonder too, when he talks about Sturgeon's law, and I want you to explain Sturgeon's law later, but it feels to me the opposite of Damon Knight, who says, if we are publishing garbage, it diminishes science fiction because, that becomes the new standard. If we're only if our bar is so low, then we're never going to improve as a genre. But here, I think Ted Sturgeon says, okay, write it. First thought, best thought, write it, send it, and then you're done, and you don't look at it again. And I wonder, that kind of like Lil B, base god kind of ethos, do you think that is good for writing? Because maybe for music, especially as a producer, it's okay because you're doing like a 1.5 minute, 2-minute song. If someone doesn't like it, they just move on to the next one. You can quickly hear whether it's a good song or not. A story, you really have to invest some time. And I wonder if so many authors in one genre are just, okay, one draft and done, send it in. I hope someone pays me. Do you think that is advancing a genre, or could that be diminishing, like Damon Knight says? And I don't know if Ted Sturgeon said if that's really what he does. This is just what I'm feeling right now. If people keep sending whatever and don't edit, is that good or bad?
Bob, I just want to take a meta note here and say I'm so thankful you brought this idea into the conversation because it is a lot more interesting to me than discussing the actual content and message of this short story. But yeah, this is such a great question. You asked me to bring up Sturgeon's law, which is that 90% of any work in any genre is going to be garbage. Well, okay, it specifically says 90% of sci-fi is garbage, and then he says 90% of anything is garbage. We can extrapolate that out. And I think that there's a lot of truth to Sturgeon's law. You look at 90% of anything, right? We, in general, in music, in books, we're listening to the top 10%. There's this idea that,
Yeah.
books, the films were better in the past. Just think of all those great movies that came out in 1999, and you can name off Fight Club, American Beauty, 12 Monkey. Like there's a ton of movies that came out in 1999 that are so good. Well, you just named off the only 3 or 4 good movies that came out that year, and everything else was crud. Uh, and this is like a good exemplification of Sturgeon's law. But with that, I think comes the other idea. We just read the short story from Damon Knight, Shall the Dust Praise Thee. And Damon Knight has this thing where he says that in science fiction, one bad book hurts the entire genre, hurts the entire movement more than 10 bad reviews. So if we look at Sturgeon's law, I think that the message we should take from that is that everything that we do as artists should be to try to get within that top 10%. You know what I mean? So like if 9 out of the 10 things you create are going to be bad, maybe you should do a little editing so that your personal ratio is more than 1 out of 10 good things. I like how you brought up like Lil B, or this kind of first thought, best thought ethos, because I suspect that's how so many of these authors are operating. And with that kind of hit rate, of course, Theodore Sturgeon is going to be the living embodiment of Sturgeon's law. 90% of what he's writing, if it's going to be first thought, best thought, your first thought is generally going to be, not that great. And I think it's interesting how the first time he read it, he thought it was garbage, but then the second time he thought it was pretty good. And I think that's because he recognized that he had that strong concept in there, that kernel of an idea, but it was just kind of, buried under all of these extra words. I don't know. I don't know, Bob. I don't know.
I wonder if it's a hangover too of probably not. This is again speculation, wild speculation. A hangover of being paid by the word. Why would I go back and cut everything if I used to get paid more for the word? Better story should have more words. I'm going to keep it all in there. Or maybe it feels like it all contributes. It creates a kind of not an atmosphere. I guess it creates an atmosphere. All of this compounding weird details that go into this story, and some of them are quite fun, almost laughably fun, or just they're weird anyway. Especially when it gets to some of the erotica. The first time he has a run-in with Tamba, the line is half an hour after blast off, and Tamba speaks, "Clothes are in the way on ship, don't you think? Bevorhidden says I should ask you because customs are different from one world to another. Isn't that so?" And then they have sex. So there's lots of fun, weird things like that in this story. And maybe that is really important for a creator. I'm on the fence about this, to be honest. I mean, I really like the Lil B idea because if you only put out the perfect stuff, for some people they'll never put out anything, and then there will be no art that they ever make, and they just have stilted themselves. There's the idea of the pottery class where you have 2 sets of students, and the master says, okay, you 3, you have 3 weeks and you have to make the best pot ever. You have to make the best piece of pottery, and you only get to make one. And he says to the others, just make as many pots as you want. So after the end of the 3 weeks, the ones that tried to master the pot, those are all garbage. They're just terrible because they've labored over these things and they haven't really learned from any mistakes. The other people, they've gotten better. Their pots are great. They can sell the pots that they've made. A lot of them are terrible, but most of them at the end are very good. So I wonder if there's a balance that has to be struck where you, yes, create constantly, but you're also trying to improve, or at least trying to do something new. But Lil B didn't do that. Lil B just put out thousands and thousands of songs, and I wonder if that's what Ted Sturgeon was doing. That's what he seems to be doing in this story. And
Sure.
did he find that fulfilling? I thought this is very interesting. He always wears sorry, he's gone now, but he used to wear a necklace that was a Q, a question. And it had, I think it was a Q with an arrow pointing in it. And what he would say to people was next question. Now, I'm not exactly sure what his intention with that was, but I have a feeling is he was always ready for the next thing. He was on to the next question. And maybe he wanted to get deeper and deeper with each question too. Maybe you can see in all of the stories that he's written, is he progressing something towards like some deeper kernel of truth, or is it kind of skimming, going up too high again, going down low, coming up high again? Is it more of a roller coaster? And does that add depth to his career as a writer, or does it, I guess, limit him? Is there a depth that comes from editing, or is it only a
Mm.
depth that comes from that first exposure to your inspiration? He seems to be very much in the inspiration camp. Inspiration or die. And I know when he was first writing, he complained a lot about writer's block. So I think maybe it could have been a fear too of, oh my God, I couldn't think of anything now. Not even first thought, best thought, any thought, go. Yeah.
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 Any thought, go. I like that. Um, well, I'll say this. I want to get back to your
Mm.
pot making metaphor. But one thing he said that I didn't attach any weight to as I was reading it in the afterword, I believe, or maybe it was in the foreword, one of the two. There's a letter from him where he's talking about how the
Mm.
the moments that you picked out earlier, where it's italicized writing, it's very purple prose, it's a change of perspective, it's a change of narrative perspective in it, and he's describing these very sensory details. Theodore Sturgeon picks out these moments and says, "This was
Mm.
something
Mm.
new I tried," and I'm attaching underline these words. I'm going to master this technique
Oh,
in future
that's
novels
very
and
cool.
stories. And to me, like at the time, I was just like, yeah, okay. But you know, uh, in relation to what you just said, I like it quite a bit because what it's showing is a person who is
Mm.
actively experimenting, who's actively learning and trying new things. And that's the thing about trying new things is they don't always work. And I think that that's the most important thing is that it was actually tried and attempted. And even if it doesn't work, I mean, I don't know if he would say it doesn't work, but he sees potential in it. So he fully intends to do more of it for the next several novels. And that's just like that's the process of a good
Mm.
writer. Or that's the process of someone who one day will be a good writer. It's like in social media stuff where they say, show your work, show your progress. Don't wait until you've, taken the perfect photograph. Post and publish every single photograph you take until, like on Instagram, until you take the good one, and you'll get that following, and they will be there and ready to appreciate it. Something
Mm.
similar, I think, is happening here. But I know I'm getting long-winded, but to get back to the pottery metaphor, I agree with you. You can't just focus on making one perfect pot. However, I think that there has to be a kind of middle ground between the two, right? It also can't just be make anything,
Mm.
amuse
Mm.
yourself
Mm.
with pots, because I think that's a recipe for boredom. It has to be like challenge yourself with each pot. It has to be like not make the one perfect pot, but bring every individual pot you work on, of which there are many, bring every individual one as close to perfection as you can make it in that moment. For the next 10 minutes, how close to perfect can this get? But then you let it go once that time limit is up. And I don't know. I think that, gosh, if you just like a quick editing
Just
pass
one.
through
Just
this, you know what
one.
I mean? To trim off the unnecessary bits. Yeah. Like to tone down the insect people climbing on
Mm.
walls in the dark alley, just to bring it together a little bit and have things that add to his central concept would turn this into a classic. Well, would turn this into a much more readable
Mm.
science fiction story.
Yes, because right now it is tedious. Whether or not he's experimenting, whether or not he's doing something innovative and new, and that we will carry with him. We have read it, and we have we have now spent a lot of time reading this. So it does feel kind of rude to do that to us, but maybe it's good for his own development as a writer. And I think you're right. We need to find a middle ground. Anyone who's writing might need some kind of middle ground. Good pot, okay pot, as long as there's pot.
Let's let's think more about this pottery metaphor as we go forward into the future of Dangerous Visions. And I think it's just something we can keep in the back of our pocket for future books, you know? All right. Talk to you later, Bob.
Talk to you later, Zach.